Okay, well, this vehicle presents really nicely. As best we can tell, the body restoration on the car was done in the 1980s. The car, to the best of our knowledge, has never been apart, except for the exterior pieces when it was repainted and some body work was done. Okay. From 6 feet, you can't really notice any flaws at all. It looks like a nicely restored vehicle. The paint is 30 years old, so if you get up close, you can see some imperfections. But let's start with the glass area. We've got some fine scratching. We've got a couple little pits, but no cracks or no larger chips. The surround for the windscreen looks good. I mean, there's some light swirl marks. I'm not sure what I think it might be stainless. I'm not sure exactly what the material is. Not aluminum. But it looks great with, some uniform slight wear. The rubber seal looks to be relatively recent, and it is still supple. I mean, from a hot climate, sometimes the seals will dry out and then water gets in the car and can cause some damage. Also, it can rust at the, water can get in behind the seal, and then it can rust behind the seal, and that can be really expensive and tricky to fix. So in this car, that isn't the case. There is no corrosion on the base of the windscreen. The rubber is still soft and supple. Okay, so passenger door, again, the trim is in nice shape. It all fits well, and the rubber is supple. And again, all of the exterior trim looks to be in good shape. Now, they only made about 7,000 of these cars. I'm not sure of the supply of some of the trim bits, but I imagine some of it's hard to get. So this car, that's not something you have to worry about. Continuing on to the back hatchboard, it's a little bit proud in the back. Of course, that's because it has an electric motor and it lifts up for ventilation. Just to explain that, the air enters the cabin through this scoop, goes into the dash, through the car, and then exits out the back. It actually works pretty well, according to the owner. Again, the trim is in nice shape. The glass shows some light, very light scratching. The rubber is still supple. The aerial, again, all the rubbers were done at this car, presumably 30 years ago, but they've looked to have been reasonably well preserved. And the same continues with the driver's side window trim, which looks pretty good, and it's all aligned nicely. These quarter windows don't open, nor do the back ones, and that's why Zagato decided to build that feature into the rear. A test of the body on any car is the shut lines. If the vehicle had major surgery, then the panel fit is likely not to be very good. So we can look at this car, and this is an alloy hood. It's a steel body on this car with alloy doors, hood, and boot lid. And we see decent panel gaps throughout. There's nothing in that. I mean, I've heard that no two Zagatos are alike. I mean, they're virtually hand-built cars. So you're not expecting, modern factory gaps, but these look pretty good, okay? And where you notice it the most, I think, is in the doors, because if you have to do work to the sills and the lower doors, then getting everything back together so it fits is difficult on many cars. And you can see that you know, when the door sits proud of the rest of the bodywork. And in this car, it's not. I've got decent panel gaps all the way throughout, and they're pretty even. And when I look down the side of the car, I don't see, you know, the doors line up. The creases from the fenders to the doors line up, and in the same in the rear, okay? So all of these shut lines and panel gaps look pretty good to me. I mean, I have every reason to believe that's the way they looked when they came out of the factory, and I do not see any issues there whatsoever. And if we look down the side of the car, it's all pretty smooth. Okay, so that's excellent on this car. Some of the other trim elements, we have the, everybody always wants to look for the stamping on the mirrors. That is a Matador mirror. The wiper arms are in good shape. Chrome for the scoop is in good shape. We've got the Zagato badge. That looks, it's brown in there. It's not rust. It's just the sealant that's holding the badge on. Door handles are good. Actually, they look pretty new. Rear aerial is good, and the badging is all very nice. That's Fulvia Sport 1.3S, and that all looks good. Okay. This badge is coming adrift a little bit, and you can see some adhesive in there that's a bit mucky, so that's going to come off one of these days, so you'll have to deal with that. The hubcaps are nice. You know, very slight chipping on the wheel rims. The tires are new manufacturer Pirelli CN36s, and I think they're bought in 2018 and have 2018 date codes, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. On this piece here, we see some of the coating of that chrome surround coming off. That's the only piece of chrome I've seen that has any issues with it. So let's look at the bumper. The bumper looks good. A couple little dents there. The light surround looks good. Indicator lights look good. Grille and the front badge looks good. And it all looks good on the front. I mean, we can see some, you know, some evidence of use, but for, you know, for a car that's, you know, 45 years old, it's actually it's holding up pretty well. Again, this piece as well has a little bit of the coating coming off. We can see the hubcap on this side. And that's the other one. Around the back, the bumpers are good. The tail lights are nice. The rubber behind them is still supple. And the chrome is nice. Okay, there's the rear fog lamp. If we get the, forgive me if I fumble around with which key it is here. Oh, I got it. Okay, so there is the opening for the spare tire, and you know, there's some kind of old rubber in there. Doesn't look that pretty, but it's functional. Okay. All right, so that's the glass, the trim, rubbers, bright work, all in good shape. The panel gaps are all in good shape. The doors close easily, and there's no scuffing on the sill plates like you see with some British cars where the doors don't fit that well. Okay, so that door shuts nicely. And let's check this one. And that one shuts nicely too. Okay. No scuff marks or unusual wear on the door striker or the sill or any part. Okay. So all of that tells me that it's a pretty good body on the car, and it is consistent, in my opinion, with a car that hasn't had too much invasive surgery to it. So it's very hard to get factory gaps and to get the doors to close nicely if you've had to, you know, replace a whole bunch of metal and make new panels and so on. That's hard to do, and you need a really talented metal guy and experienced to be able to make that happen. So I don't believe that this car was ever subjected to that, just because everything fits so well and the panel gaps are good. Okay, now it was painted 30 years ago, and you know, we can see some imperfections in the paint. So the hood looks good. If we get really close, you know, I can see some slight bubbling behind this S. I'm trying to get that for you. Very hard to see, but it's there. And that's aluminum. The rest of it looks pretty good to me. The front shroud, I can't notice anything, any flaws at all in that. The glue on this is kind of looking a little bit orange, so that could be redone. With the door, it doesn't have any chips in it, doesn't have any dents in it. We can see some really faint evidence of light, really light bubbling along the bottom bit of the door. It's very subtle, and it probably wouldn't even photograph. I don't even know if I can pick that up, but you can see it coming. You can see the marks on it a little bit, and again, that's over 30 years. And interestingly, this car doesn't have a sill that covers up what you'd normally, which would be the monocoque of the car. Now you can see where it's been jacked up. The paint's rubbed off a little bit, and there's a little bit of rust there, but it's pretty straight, and rust free. Okay, just a couple little marks on there. For the rear fender, you know, I'm not seeing anything in the rear fender arch at all. It all looks pretty good. This is steel. You know, normally you'd look for bubbling, you know, the lower parts of it, and I don't see any at all. You know, there's the odd tiny imperfection. You know, it wasn't a concours paint job. It was a very good paint job, but not concours. The rear deck lid. Well, I see again a little bit of a bubble starting here, and that's about it. The roof, some tiny imperfections, but nothing that's obvious on the roof. The rear shroud looks pretty good to me. I don't see any. Again, you know, you'd want to look at the lower parts of it in particular, And there's no bubbling that I see or evidence of corrosion on the rear shroud or the rear arch. You know, sometimes moisture gets behind the tail lights and you can see some bubbling in there. I don't see that at all. A little dent in the bumper there. The passenger rear quarter, I don't see anything there at all. All looks pretty good. The rear arch, rear wheel arch, again, I don't really see any imperfections. One tiny bubble. One tiny bubble right there, maybe. Try to get that for you. Again, the lower sill looks good. There's no corrosion there. This door, you know, we see some cracking in the paint. Right here, a little bit of bubbling. And again, the same thing on the other door. We see some light evidence of corrosion along the bottom of the door. Now this door, as I showed earlier in the video, you can see that that's all exposed. But for whatever reason, this section, you know, shows some corrosion from front to back. So that could be refinished. Front fender, this Zagato badge, the grill is, or the badge is, the glue is coming undone a little bit. So we should probably just take that off. A little bit of a, no, it's just dirt. And it looks pretty good, okay? So all in all, it looks like the only panels that have any real issue are the aluminum ones. All the steel looks good, but where we see the bottoms of the alloy door skins and a tiny little bit on the bonnet and a tiny little bit on the rear hatch, which are all aluminum panels, we see a little bit of evidence of electrolytic corrosion on that aluminum, okay? But the steel is, for the body, is in nice shape. So overall, I think it's a 30-year-old body restoration on a fundamentally dry car that's held up well over the last 30 years. And the car can be enjoyed now. It looks good now. It certainly drives nicely. Or, you know, it could be refinished. But you don't think you need to do anything. The only real sort of body problem the car has is that the floor was patched 30 years ago, and that patch wasn't really done that well and isn't really holding up that well. But the car is watertight. It just doesn't look that nice from underneath. Okay, so that's up to the next owner. All right, so. And let's have a look at the interior of the car. All right, so, you know, the interiors of these weren't that robust. We can see that we've got a problem with this trim piece here, and that's been repaired before, but not very well. I think it was just glued down, so there's that. Otherwise, the door card looks good. We have these seats which look really quite wonderful. Rubber mats, so there's no carpets in here. You want to see what the floors look like. And let's just take these mats out so you can see some of the patchwork, but there's no rust coming through. And it's kind of got this thick coat of rust paint on it, which is serviceable, okay? The seat vinyl is in nice shape. The rear section is in nice shape. Try to get, can't really undo this mat here. Or not very much of it. Hang on. Okay, so we can see again the black paint rust paint on it, but it's not rusty, okay? We can see the rear carpet looks good. The headliner looks good. It would have been replaced presumably at the same time as the body restoration. All of the trim, which is probably the most important part, looks to be here on the door caps and along the rear windows. The vinyl is all nice. The door cards are new. The dash is in nice shape. Instruments look good. The switchgear is in good shape. The veneer for the dash isn't cracked, and the wooden wheel is in nice shape as well. Okay, so overall, the interior is holding up well for a car of its age. It's all original. Doesn't look like any of it is reproduction, although I think the door cards are. But in terms of the steering wheel, dash, instruments, gear lever, all the interior trim, all that looks to be well preserved and original. The 3-point belts, I believe, are a later addition. Okay. Okay, under the hood, we have a nicely presented engine bay. It's a little bit dusty. We let the car sit. It had only one really tiny drop of oil, which is pretty good for an Italian car of this vintage. I'll show you the oil just so you get a visual of it. So that's the drop of oil the car left. So there's my finger. Okay, so that's the extent of it leaking. And it sat here for a while. So we don't have any noticeable oil leaks from the the valve cover gasket, the head gasket, etc. There's no coolant leaks. And I don't see anything that's amiss in the engine bay. The battery's fresh. It was just tuned up in the fall. It's just an engine bay. It hasn't been detailed. We can see the data plate here, and the big air intake for the cabin down there. And it's just gorgeous in here. I mean, the more you look at it, the more you see these kind of wonderful details. This subframe, alloy subframe that's cast alloy, it really is a thing of beauty. And you can, as Graham said, you can lift this whole car off the front. But everything in here looks nice, and it doesn't no evidence of really bad wiring or any sort of bodges. It's all pretty straightforward. There's again the VIN of the car, and the bonnet doesn't look like it was ever crumpled. Okay, so everything looks pretty good under here. Okay, well, let's have a look at the underneath of this Lancia. Of course, we know that any 1970 Italian car, or pretty much any 1970 car whatsoever, you need to look for rust, and so you'll go straight to the floorboards generally, and then kind of radiate outwards and go to the sills and the inner and outer sills and the lower doors. And in just about all the cars, that is where you will find it. So this Lancia, I would say, has some rust, but it's localized, and I would not describe this as a rusty car. Okay, so let's look at the floors. Now the body restoration on this Lancia is about 30 years old, and the floors were patched not very well 30 years ago, and so we can see that the rust is coming back. Now they were patched mostly at the rear, I believe this part of the floors are original, and you know, it's a solid metal along the front. When we get to the back, we have a hole there that I think runs up into a patch panel. And then in this lower part here, then obviously we have some crusty metal, okay? And I think this is where the patch was laid. The patches were let in from the inside, laid over top of this metal. So obviously that wasn't very well done, okay? And on the other side, it's a little bit better, but there again, there's a thick coat of undercoat. This undercoat is 30 years old, so we didn't go and spray the car with a bunch of goop to try to hide anything. This is what the car was done to the car 30 years ago. Now, if we go outboard, we can see this sill here, and this is all solid metal. And there is not a lot of corrosion. Well, there's a little bit there on the sills. And this runs all the way to the back. And let's go to the other side. And we can see it here. It actually looks pretty solid on the exterior perimeter. Looks like a little bit of a dent there, possibly from jacking. The jacking points look good. Like I said, the front of the floor pans look good. The center of the car looks good, but it needs new floor pans. These can be purchased. There's a supplier in Italy in various pieces, and I don't believe the work needs to be carried out into the sills, because actually these parts look pretty good. And when I paint metered them, there's like an average of about 1 millimeter of filler and paint, and so they're not like covered, they're not just coated in Bondo, okay? So it's metal underneath, and these sills look pretty decent to me around the back of this. It's all solid metal. The inner wheel arch looks pretty decent to me as well, okay? The car came from southern Italy, and that's where it was driven or lived up until about 10 years ago. And so this wasn't a rusty car. I mean, this panel here obviously is gonna, in the rear, is gonna attract a lot of gunk and is susceptible to rust. And this edge along the end here looks pretty good. We can see some rust above the silencer. Around the corner, again, a little bit more, so this isn't finished very well. But again, it looks like reasonably solid metal. Up into the passenger rear arch, and again, it looks pretty good. I mean, keeping in mind it's 30 years old. If it was just filled with Bondo, it would all be cracking and coming apart now. And we've got this edge again, just a little bit, you know, perhaps where it was jacked up and the paint was removed. And then the sills are just not too bad. A little bit of rust in there maybe. Try to get that for you. And the driver's front wheel arch looks okay. All right, so the front valence panel, again, also very susceptible. And it looks okay too. You know, there's a little bit of rust there, but it's a straight metal edge. It's not just filled with filler. Okay. All right, for the lower parts of the bodywork, the painted portions, we can walk around the car. And, you know, like I said, it's 30 years old. So if there was a lot of Bondo, it would start to crack and fall out by now, okay? Or you'd see the paint imperfections. And it looks pretty good. It looks pretty good. The bonnet, doors, and trunk lid are aluminum on this car. On some of the Zagatos, they're all aluminum, and the body panels are steel, I believe. This is a late Series 1 car, so it has alloy doors with a steel, steel, the other body panels being steel. So we can look at the doors for any signs of corrosion. And there is a little bit of bubbling at the extremities of the door, presumably where the steel frame of the door contacts the aluminum skin. So we can see a little bit here. Again, it's 30 years old, so it's just a little bit of corrosion starting at the bottom of the doors. The steel panels don't seem to have any corrosion at all on the outside. So the rest of the steel panels are good. I'll run a paint meter over it so you can see the depth as well, but I did it before, and there's nothing unusual with the paint readings, okay? So again, doesn't appear to be any rust or any bubbling coming through on the steel panels on the fender. Maybe one bubble here. When we get to the doors, we can see this door is a bit more of a problem. It's starting to crack, and there is some corrosion again. I mean, we can see underneath where that's going to start. Now, there's no metal frame there. When I look at the corrosion, it's on the part of the door that's actually accessible. So that's good news. You know, that's a lot easier to fix than if it's covered by metal and then you have to, or steel, and you have to separate the aluminum from the steel. Okay, so that actually looks like it's reasonably easy to take care of. I'll show you on the other side again. It's kind of unusual when you look in here, you can see the bottom of the door seal. Like normally that would be covered, but in this car, you know, the bottom 2 inches is just left open, and that's where all the bubbling is. So I think that's fairly easy to finish. You know, you can drive the car as is and enjoy it. And then when the time is convenient and you've lined up the metal workers, it's a fairly easy process just to cut out that floor and replace it with the new panels that are available. You could probably do that without even disturbing the rest of the bodywork. Or, you know, you could refresh the paint as well. It's 30 years old. But it does not look like to me that by doing work to the floors, you necessitate rebuilding the sills of the car. They look like they're in okay shape. I think you can just replace the floors on this car. That's my opinion of it anyway. I'll run a paint meter through it so you can see the depth of the paint. And the last thing I can do is pull out my paint meter, and I've done, you know, the bottom of the car, but I can go around and show you what the readings are. So it's an alloy okay, so we're getting readings of about 1 millimeter, so 1,000 micrometers, which is consistent with you know, a layer of primer and a paint, somewhat thick, but for an old car generally you have a thicker primer, which then you block sand, so that's why you get some variation. All right, it's a bit thicker there. Let's look at the roof. Isn't a place you generally want to see a lot of filler. And we have, you know, in between a half about 1/2 millimeter, well, 0.2 of a millimeter. So, okay. Nothing scary. Okay. Front fender. Okay, it looks like there's some filler in this area, but not on the edges. That tells me it's a dent. Probably be easier to read this if it was right side up. And I think I did this one before, and I think there's a dent below the Z here that's filled in. But if I go to the bottoms, I get the reading. So there's some filler in this area beneath the Z. Top of the door. Okay, it looks like there's some filler at the bottom of the door. Okay, between 1 and 2 millimeters for the rear quarter, rear hatch, again we're consistent around 1 millimeter, rear valence, okay, so all between 1 and 2 millimeters. Driver's passenger door. So this is 913 micrometers, or 0.9 of a millimeter. Okay, well, what do the meter readings tell us? Well, a new car, with a robot paint sprayer on brand new panels with that's going on a current assembly line, would have a paint depthness of about 200 micrometers. Generally, if like a brand new car is repainted, you see, 400s and 500s just for a repaint. For a classic car where you generally use a thicker primer and then you block it down, generally, even without any dents at all on the car, like perfect metal, if you see the thing in the metal and there's no detectable dents in it, you're still going to see a paint depth of around 1,000 micrometers, or about 1 millimeter. If the panels are a little bit wavy, you know, you'll see between 1 and 2 millimeters. And if there's a big dent or something that's just filled in, well, you can see, you know, you can see 2, 3, or 4 or 5 millimeters. If you get more than about 2 millimeters, what happens is that the solvents in the primer evaporate, and it shrinks and it starts cracking. This can happen within a couple of years. If you have a body restoration, I mean, in my experience, if you have a body restoration that's 20 or 30 years old, and you don't see the paint cracking, it means you don't have, you know, a lot of filler or any filler over about 2 millimeters. Now, we've just seen that with the paint meter of on this car, and we can see only one place in the car, in the lower bit of the passenger door, where that paint is starting to crack after 30 years. So I would hope that that would give you some degree of confidence that, you know, if you did do a body restoration on the car, you wouldn't strip it down and find just a rusty mess underneath, okay? So there's no evidence to support that. If it was rusty, you would see it by now after 30 years. And you do see it in the floor, to be fair to the car, but you don't see it in the body. And you don't see anything of any significance in any of the steel parts of this car. And the only corrosion that I'm picking up is a little bit of any significance, really, is just the bottom of the doors. And that is electrolytic corrosion. And those are accessible on the doors. Okay, so I hope that was helpful and thorough walk around of this 1970 Lancia Fulvia Sport Zagato. Okay, so in summary, how can we wrap up this video? And first of all, thanks for watching the whole thing. I hope it's not too boring. But what can we say about this car? Well, first of all, it's a very interesting car, a very interesting looking car from a really storied coach builder, Zagato. Very, very few of these would have come to North America. It's a very rare car in North America. They would have made, you know, 300,000 Fulvias. Most of those would have been four-door sedans, and they also made the coupe version. I think they were made around 80,000, if I'm not mistaken, of those. So those relatively common, and they only made 7,000 of the Zagatos, or of the Sport Zagatos. So this was sort of a high water mark for Zagato. It was their biggest commission from a manufacturer, and they made this car in larger numbers than any of their other cars. It didn't save Lancia from financial trouble, but it was the high water mark for Lancia volume and quality and so forth. So Lancia had a massive string of technical innovations, from, you know, the first monocoque construction with the Lambda to the V4 engine, which they came out with, and these again for the Lambda in 1922. First 5-speed gearbox, rear transaxle, you know, a whole bunch of other really interesting technical firsts. They kind of went a little bit crazy with offering, you know, flat fours and narrow angle V4s, and, you know, they changed like the V angle of the engine, like it seems like every year. So if there was a technically superior way, regardless of cost, Lancia pursued it, and that was probably their downfall. But they've left a legacy of some really interesting sort of jewel-like machines, and with a really great competition history, especially in the 1970s. Okay, so it's a really interesting car. It's attracted a really interesting group of owners. We can see, you know, great videos on Jay Leno's Garage when Donald Osborne brought his by. Harry Metcalf in the UK, he's restoring one. And those two videos as well give a lot more insight into the car. So it's an excellent rally car, an excellent long distance rally car. The owner of this car, the first thing he did with it is took it on like a 4,000 kilometer trip, you know, on the highway. So it keeps up the traffic. It's comfortable. It was dead reliable for 4,000 kilometers. And since then, we have a car that was originally from southern Italy, that to best of my estimation was never rusted. It does have some rust on the floors, but the rest of the body wasn't rusted. I've done really thorough paint meter reports on all of the panels, and they don't identify any real problem areas. The floors can be addressed without touching the rest of the body panels, because the body panels are solid. It's not like they're rusty. If you have rusty sills, well, then you have nothing to attach the floors to. So this isn't the case with this. It can be enjoyed as is, like the current owner has used it, or you could treat it to just floors, or another body restoration if you want to, but you don't need to do that with the car. And mechanically, it's in beautiful shape. It's just been tuned up. It's been perfectly reliable, and I've no qualms, letting somebody fly in and drive the car home. Okay, so it's a car that's been tested on the road and proven to be reliable. So there's not very many of these that you can say that for. So with all of that, it's a really interesting purchase, and an entry point into the Zagato Club, and the sky's the limit with that club. Okay, so with that, thank you very much. Thanks to the owner, Graham Bennett, for being in this video, and George Canoe, the owner of Lugnuts, who helped us film a little bit of it. And it's really a pleasure to represent this car and put it on Bring a Trailer and get it ready for the next custodian. Thank you very much. Lawrence Romanosky from Calgary, Canada. Please like and subscribe.